The mahogany grandfather clock in the corner of Dad's study struck midnight as I carefully lifted another dusty box from beneath his desk. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it, knowing these might be the last few hours I had to search freely before Victoria took control of everything. My name is Elizabeth Chen, and at 34, I was about to lose my childhood home to my younger sister's ruthless ambition. Dad had passed away 3 days ago after a brief battle with cancer, and tomorrow was the funeral. Victoria had already made it clear she was taking charge of everything: the house, the business, the legacy Dad had built from nothing. I hadn't planned to be here tonight, searching through Dad's belongings like a thief. But something he'd said during our last conversation kept nagging at me. He'd been so weak then, barely able to lift his head from a hospital pillow. But his eyes had locked onto mine with startling clarity. "Lizzy," he'd whispered, using my childhood nickname, "remember the story about the jade dragon?" Before I could ask what he meant, Victoria had burst into the room, all designer clothes and fake concern, pushing me aside to take her place by his bedside. That was the last time I spoke to him. He slipped away the next morning while I was getting coffee from a hospital cafeteria. The Jade Dragon. It was a story Dad used to tell us when we were little, about a precious family heirloom that had been lost during our grandfather's escape from China during the Cultural Revolution. But Dad always said the dragon wasn't really lost, just waiting to be found by someone worthy. I'd always thought it was just a bedtime story, something to teach us about perseverance and honor. But why mention it now, in his final hours? The box in front of me contained old photographs, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. I rifled through them, my heart aching at images of a younger, healthier version of my father. There he was, standing proud outside Chen Investments on opening day. Another showed him holding me as a baby, then Victoria a few years later. Victoria. My throat tightened thinking about how she changed over the years. We'd been close once, before money and status became her entire personality. Now she was Dad's golden child, the one who'd followed in his footsteps, who'd made partner at a prestigious law firm while I chose to become a high school history teacher. What a waste of potential, she sneered when I told her my career choice. Dad built an empire for us, and you want to teach teenagers about the Civil War. But Dad had never seemed disappointed in me, even if he didn't understand my choices. He'd supported me through college, helped me buy my first car, came to every graduation. It was Victoria who painted me as the family failure, who whispered in his ear during his final years about how I couldn't be trusted with any real responsibility. A flash of green caught my eye as I lifted another stack of photos. Tucked beneath them was a small leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. The cover was worn, the pages yellow with age. When I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. The entire journal was written in Chinese, my father's precise handwriting filling page after page. My Mandarin wasn't perfect, but I could make out enough to realize this wasn't just any diary. It was a detailed account of our family history, going back 3 generations. And there, marked with a small red tab, was a section about the jade dragon. My hands shook as I read, the words slowly coming into focus. This wasn't just a story, it was real. The dragon was real, and according to Dad's notes, it was worth millions, not just for its historical value, but because hidden inside it were documents that could change everything. I was so absorbed in reading that I didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. Well, Victoria's voice cut through the silence like a knife. What do we have here? I slammed the journal shut, but not fast enough. Victoria stood in the doorway, her perfectly manicured hand resting on the frame, her red-soled heels clicking against the hardwood as she stepped into the room. "Going through Dad's things already?" she asked, her voice dripping with false concern. "The funeral's not even until tomorrow, Lizzy. Show some respect." I stood up, clutching the journal behind my back. "I was just looking for some photos for the memorial slideshow," I lied, knowing she wouldn't believe me. She didn't. Her eyes narrowed as she moved closer. "In his private study? At midnight? Please." She held out her hand. "Give me whatever you're hiding." "It's nothing," I said, taking a step back. "Just some old photos." Victoria's perfectly painted lips curved into a cruel smile. "You know, as Dad's executor, I have the right to examine everything in this house. And once the will is read." She let the threat hang in the air. My heart raced. I couldn't let her get the journal. Not now. Not when I was so close to understanding what Dad had been trying to tell me. "Fine. I said, reaching behind me with my left hand while my right still gripped the journal. Here are the photos I found. As Victoria reached for the stack of photographs, I used the distraction to slip the journal into the back of my pants, letting my loose blouse cover it. She flipped through the photos dismissively. "How sentimental of you," she said, her voice thick with sarcasm. "But you really shouldn't be in here. In fact," she glanced around the study with an air of ownership, "you shouldn't be in this house at all. I'm having the locks changed tomorrow after the funeral." "This is still my home too," I protested, even though I knew it was futile. Victoria laughed, the sound as cold as her heart had become. "Oh, Lizzy. Sweet, naive Lizzy. This stopped being your home the moment you chose to disappoint Dad with your modest ambitions." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I know you think he loved us equally, but let's be honest. He knew who could be trusted with his legacy. Why do you think he made me executor?" I felt the corner of the journal pressing against my back, and somehow it gave me strength. "Dad loved us both," I said firmly, "and if you think this is about money or status, then you never really knew him at all." Something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Anger, maybe even a hint of doubt, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Get out," she said, her voice hard. "The funeral's at 10 a.m. Try to dress appropriately for once." I walked out of the study, my heart pounding, the journal burning against my skin like a brand. As I reached my car, I could see Victoria watching from the window, her silhouette dark against the warm light of Dad's study. She thought she had won, that tomorrow's will reading would cement her victory. But as I drove home through the empty streets, Dad's journal safely beside me, I realized this was just the beginning. The jade dragon was real, and somewhere in this city, it was waiting to be found. Dad's last words hadn't been random. They were a message meant for me. Now I just had to figure out what it all meant before Victoria realized what she let slip through her fingers. I stayed up all night, carefully translating page after page of Dad's journal. The story of the jade dragon was more complex than I'd imagined. It wasn't just an heirloom. It was a key to our family's true legacy, one that went far beyond Chen investments and the fortune Victoria was so desperate to control. As the sun rose, casting long shadows across my small apartment, I finally understood what I had to do. Today, I would bury my father. Tomorrow, I would begin the hunt for a truth that could change everything. Let Victoria have her moment at the funeral. Let her smirk and posture and play the grieving daughter. She had no idea what was coming. The morning of the funeral dawned gray and humid, fitting for a day that would change everything. I arrived early at the funeral home, Dad's journal locked safely in my apartment. I'd spent hours memorizing the key details, knowing I couldn't risk Victoria finding it. The parking lot was already filling up with luxury cars. Dad's business associates, board members, and Victoria's country club friends. I smoothed down my simple black dress, feeling underdressed as always among the designer labels and perfect blowouts. "Elizabeth," a familiar voice called out as I reached the entrance. Aunt May, Dad's younger sister, hurried toward me. She was the only one in the family who still treated me like I mattered. "I've been looking for you everywhere." She pulled me into a tight hug, and I caught a whiff of her familiar jasmine perfume. "Victoria's been impossible," she whispered. "She's acting like she's the only one who lost someone." Before I could respond, Victoria's voice rang out from the entrance. "Aunt May, the family is gathering in the private room." Her eyes slid over me like I was invisible. Immediate family only. Aunt May's grip on my arm tightened. "Elizabeth is immediate family." Victoria's perfect smile didn't waver. "Of course, but as executor, I need to discuss some matters privately with you first." She practically dragged Aunt May away, leaving me standing alone among the arriving mourners. I made my way into the main hall, where Dad's casket was surrounded by elaborate flower arrangements. A large photo of him stood on an easel, one from his prime, showing him confident and strong behind his desk at Chen Investments. My throat tightened. He'd been so different in those final days, almost desperate to tell me something. "Miss Chen." A quiet voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find Mr. Wang, Dad's longtime accountant, standing beside me. His lined face was etched with genuine sorrow. "I was hoping to speak with you before the service." "Of course," I said, surprised. Mr. Wang had always been polite to me, but we never had much reason to talk. He'd worked with Victoria on the company finances for years. He glanced around nervously before continuing. Your father? He asked me to give you something, but the timing had to be right. He patted his jacket pocket. After the will reading, come to my office. There's something you need to see. Before I could ask what he meant, Victoria's voice cut through the murmur of conversations. Everyone, please take your seats. We're about to begin. Mr. Wong disappeared into the crowd, leaving me with more questions than answers. I found a seat near the back, watching as Victoria took her place at the podium. The perfect picture of elegant grief in her designer black dress and subtle makeup. My father was a great man, she began, her voice thick with carefully manufactured emotion. He built an empire from nothing. Taught us the value of hard work and determination. She paused for dramatic effect. Well, some of us learned those lessons better than others. Several people turned to look at me, and I felt my face flush. Victoria continued her eulogy, painting herself as the devoted daughter who had followed in his footsteps, while carefully implying that I had been a disappointment. I thought about the journal hidden in my apartment, about the mystery of the jade dragon. Victoria could have this moment, her little performance for all these people who didn't really know Dad at all. I knew the truth, or at least, I was starting to piece it together. After the service, as people filed out toward their cars for the procession to the cemetery, Victoria cornered me by the guest book. I hope you're not planning to make a scene at the will reading tomorrow, she said, her voice low. It would only embarrass yourself. I met her gaze steadily. Don't worry about me, Victoria. I know exactly what I'm doing. She laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. That would be a first. She leaned closer, dropping her voice to a whisper. I saw you talking to Mr. Wong. Whatever you're plotting, it won't work. Dad left everything to me. The house, the company, everything. You'll get your teacher's pension and nothing else. We'll see, I replied, thinking of Mr. Wong's mysterious message and the secrets in Dad's journal. Victoria's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? But I was already walking away, heading toward my car. Let her stew in that uncertainty. For once, I was the one with information she didn't have. The burial was brief, the August heat making everyone uncomfortable in their formal black clothes. I watched as they lowered Dad's casket into the ground, remembering his last words about the jade dragon. What had he been trying to tell me? As the crowd dispersed, Aunt May caught up with me again. Come to dinner tonight, she said quietly. There are things we need to discuss. I nodded, noticing Victoria watching us from beside her Mercedes, her expression calculating. Something was shifting in the air, like a calm before a storm. That evening, I sat in Aunt May's cozy kitchen, the familiar sense of ginger and garlic filling the air as she prepared dinner. She'd always been the keeper of family stories, the one who remembered everything about our history in China before the family fled to America. Your father came to see me last month, she said, setting a cup of tea in front of me. He was worried about something, but he wouldn't tell me what. He just kept saying he had to make things right. I took a sip of tea, letting a warm liquid calm my nerves. Did he ever mention the jade dragon to you? Aunt May's hands stilled over the stove. Where did you hear about that? Dad mentioned it in the hospital, right before. I swallowed hard. And I found his journal. She turned to face me, her expression serious. The dragon isn't just a statue, Elizabeth. It's proof of something your grandfather did before we left China. Something that could change everything for our family. What do you mean? But before she could answer, her phone buzzed. She checked it and her face paled. Victoria's on her way here. She must have followed you. I stood up quickly. I should go. Aunt May grabbed my arm. Wait. There's a key in your father's old office at Chen Investments. In the bottom drawer of his desk, there's a false bottom. Find it before Victoria does. The sound of tires on gravel announced Victoria's arrival. I slipped out the back door just as the doorbell rang, my mind racing with questions. A key? To what? As I drove home through the darkening streets, I thought about everything I'd learned. The will reading was tomorrow morning, and Victoria was convinced she had everything wrapped up perfectly. But between Mr. Wong's mysterious message, Dad's journal, and now Aunt May's revelation about the key, I knew there was much more to this story. I parked in front of my apartment building, but something made me hesitate before getting out. A black SUV I didn't recognize was parked across the street, its engine running. As I watched, the driver's silhouette looked suspiciously like one of Victoria's law firm partners. She was having me followed. Instead of going inside, I pulled away from the curb, watching in my rearview mirror as the SUV started to follow. Victoria might think she had all the power, but she was clearly worried about something. And tomorrow at the will reading, I had a feeling we'd both discovered just how complicated Dad's legacy really was. The law office where the will reading was scheduled felt more like a fortress than a place of business. Victoria had chosen her own firm's conference room for the occasion naturally. As I walked through the glass doors at precisely 9 a.m., I could feel the weight of every security camera tracking my movement. Last night's car chase had ended at a 24-hour diner where I'd waited until the SUV finally gave up and drove away. I'd spent the rest of the night in a budget hotel, paid for in cash, poring over Dad's journal again. There were references to a safe deposit box, but the bank name was written in a code I hadn't cracked yet. "You look tired, Lizzy," Victoria said as I entered the conference room. She sat at the head of the long table, elegant as always in a pale gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Rough night?" I took a seat as far from her as possible, watching as other family members filed in. Aunt May arrived last, giving me a subtle nod as she sat down. Mr. Wang was there too, his expression unreadable as he organized papers at the front of the room. "Let's begin," Victoria's lawyer, James Patterson, announced. He was one of the senior partners at the firm, known for handling the messiest family disputes. "I'll keep this brief." As he started reading the will, I watched Victoria's face. She was practically glowing with anticipation, already mentally redecorating Dad's house, no doubt. "To my daughter Victoria," Patterson read, "I leave my controlling interest in Chen Investments along with the family home and all its contents." Victoria's smile widened. She shot me a triumphant look. "To my daughter Elizabeth," he continued, and I braced myself for the token inheritance Victoria had probably pushed for. "I leave my personal effects, including all documents and items stored in Safety Deposit Box 2317 at First National Bank." Victoria's head snapped up. "What safety deposit box?" Patterson looked confused. "It's listed here in the will. Box 2317, registered solely in Mr. Chen's name." I fought to keep my expression neutral, but inside my heart was racing. The bank name had been in the journal all along. I just hadn't seen it. "There must be some mistake," Victoria said sharply. "I'm the executor. I should have been informed about any safety deposit boxes." "Actually," Mr. Wang spoke up, his quiet voice carrying surprising authority, "Mr. Chen made arrangements for that box privately. Only he and Elizabeth had access." Victoria's face flushed red. "That's impossible. I demand to see." "The paperwork is all in order," Patterson interrupted. "The box and its contents belong to Elizabeth now." I stood up, gathering my things. "If that's everything, I have a bank to visit." "Sit down," Victoria snapped. "This isn't over. Whatever's in that box is part of Dad's estate, which means as executor." Actually, Mr. Wang cut in again. "The box was registered separately from the estate. Your position as executor gives you no authority over it." Victoria looked like she might explode. She turned to her lawyer, but Patterson was already shaking his head. "He's right. The box is outside our jurisdiction." I walked out of the conference room, Victoria's angry voice following me down the hall. By the time I reached the elevator, I could hear her heels clicking rapidly behind me. "Whatever you think you're doing," she called out, "it won't work. You really think Dad would leave anything valuable to you?" I turned to face her as the elevator doors opened. "You never really knew him, did you? All those years focused on money and status, and you missed everything that actually mattered." "Don't you dare," she started, but the elevator doors closed on her furious face. First National Bank was a massive stone building downtown, the kind of place that had seen generations of family fortunes pass through its doors. I approached the desk with Dad's key, which I'd retrieved from his office that morning before anyone else arrived. The safety deposit box was larger than I expected. The bank manager led me to a private room, where I could examine its contents alone. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside was another box, smaller and clearly very old. It was carved from dark wood, with intricate patterns that looked like flowing water. On top was a letter addressed to me in Dad's handwriting. "My dearest Elizabeth," it began. "If you're reading this, it means you understood my message about the Jade Dragon. I always knew you would be the one to appreciate our real family legacy." I read the letter twice, tears streaming down my face. Then I opened the wooden box. The jade dragon was smaller than I'd imagined, about the size of my palm. It was exquisitely carved, its scales so detailed they seemed to move in the light. But it wasn't the artistry that made my breath catch, it was what I could see tucked inside its partially hollow body. Documents, ancient yellow papers covered in Chinese characters, and modern ones too. Bank statements, certificates, and a flash drive. Just as I was processing what I was seeing, my phone buzzed. A text from Aunt May. Victoria knows about the dragon. She's on her way. I carefully photographed everything, then uploaded the images to my secure cloud storage. Victoria might try to steal the physical items, but she couldn't erase the truth they revealed. The door burst open. Victoria stood there, flanked by 2 security guards and a bank manager. "Stop," she commanded. "Those items belong to the estate." I held up Dad's letter. "No, they don't. And once everyone sees what's in here, you'll understand why Dad protected them from you." "What are you talking about?" I smiled, feeling truly confident for the first time in years. "The dragon isn't just an heirloom, Victoria. It's proof. Proof that grandfather didn't just escape China with nothing. He was entrusted with documents and accounts that were supposed to be returned to certain families. Families whose descendants are still looking for their lost inheritance." Victoria's face went pale. "You're lying. The proof is all here. The original documents, the accounts Dad tracked down, everything. He spent years trying to make it right, to find these families. But he knew you tried to keep it all for yourself, just like you've tried to keep everything else." "You can't prove any of this," she said, but her voice shook slightly. "Actually, I can. It's all documented, in Dad's journal, in these papers, and in the evidence he collected on this flash drive. Evidence I've already backed up and shared with Mr. Wong and Aunt May." Victoria took a step back, her perfect composure cracking. "You wouldn't dare expose this. It would ruin the company's reputation." "No," I corrected her. "It would restore our family's true honor. That's what Dad wanted. Not the empire you've been so desperate to control, but the chance to right an old wrong." The bank manager cleared his throat. "Ms. Chen, Victoria, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is a private room, and your sister has sole access to this box." Victoria's eyes darted between me and the dragon. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how to spin this, how to maintain control. But she had nothing. "This isn't over," she said finally, turning on her heel and storming out. But it was over. In the following weeks, the truth came out. The documents in the dragon revealed how our grandfather had helped several wealthy families protect their assets during the Cultural Revolution. Dad had spent years tracking down their descendants, and now I could finally help these families reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Victoria fought it, of course. She tried to bury the story, to discredit me, to maintain her grip on power. But with Mr. Wong's help and the evidence Dad had collected, the truth was undeniable. Chen Investments underwent a major restructuring, with a new board of directors and a commitment to making amends. I stayed at my teaching job. It was never about the money for me. But I also took on the responsibility of managing the foundation Dad had secretly set up to help return these lost inheritances. It was his real legacy, the one he had trusted me to protect and continue. The jade dragon sits on my desk now. A reminder that sometimes the most valuable inheritances aren't the ones you can count in dollars and cents. Victoria still won't speak to me, but that's okay. She got what she always wanted, money and status. But I got something far more precious. The truth about our family and the chance to make things right. Last week, I received a letter from one of the families we helped. They share photos of their grandparents, stories of their lives before they lost everything. "Your father was a hero," they wrote. "And you are living proof that his spirit lives on." I think Dad would have liked that. He always said the dragon wasn't lost, just waiting to be found by someone worthy. In the end, he made sure it found its way to exactly where it needed to be.